Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loki here. Join me today as we do a garden chat while we also do some work in my grow room. So let's go. In today's video, I figured we could do a little bit of a garden chat. We'll do a little bit of potting up, and then we're also going to sow some seeds. I knew today was going to be a busy day in the garden, which is in my house. So I figured why not just turn the camera on and just chat with you. It's like chatting with a friend while we're sitting here and doing some gardening work. And you can see I have a lot of things going on here. I have some cell packs that are filled up with potting mix, and we're going to be potting up some vinca, which is an annual where I live. We also have a bunch of seeds that we're going to be sowing. There are onions, Coleus, trailing Lobelia, as well as Impatiens. And remember, it's so much fun to follow along, not only with me, but other people that are making videos on seed starting. But keep a number of things in mind. The biggest thing I want to share is sow your seeds when it's the right time for you. And that's not based on your USDA hardiness zone. You and I can be in the same zone, zone 5, and you could see me starting these seeds today. But you might have to start your seeds earlier or later than I'm starting them. It comes down to your location. The best way to know when your average last frost date is just to do a search on the internet and say, when is my average last frost date? And then put in your location. It can be your zip code, it can be your city and state, but it's important to get that information so then you know when to start your seeds. So based on my location and not my growing zone, my average last frost date is May 15th. Once I know that date, I can then count backwards by looking at all the different seeds that I want to start and looking at when it says to start those seeds. And also, the easiest part of seed starting is taking the seeds and just sprinkling them. Then it gets a little bit more work, a little bit trickier. You have to keep them watered. You need to pot them up, fertilize them, keep taking care of these plants. So the more seeds you start, the more work you have. It's not a bad thing, but just keep that in mind because you might be seeing me or other people sowing a ton of seeds. But remember, we might have different reasons. For example, I have a backyard plant nursery. So not only am I sowing a lot of seeds for myself in my garden, I'm also sowing a bunch of seeds because I plan on selling them as part of my plant nursery. Also, a lot of times I'll sow a ton of seeds because many of the seeds I'm sowing were seeds that I collected myself. They might be 3, 4, 5 years old. That means they're not all going to germinate. So it's better for me to try to use up some of my older seeds, sprinkle a bunch of them there with the hope that some of them will germinate. With the exception of the onions, the rest of the seeds that we're going to sow today are being sown a little bit earlier than what's normally suggested. And the reason I'm starting them earlier is because I'm planning to pinch them. There are certain plants, including the ones we're going to sow today, that can benefit from pinching. It's always good to do a search on the internet on the seeds that you want to sow and see if it helps or maybe it doesn't help to pinch that plant back. Usually you want to pinch plants back to make it so that they're not very leggy and it encourages side growth. And that just means you'll have a bushier plant with more flowers. Keep in mind, if you are planning to pinch back any of your plants and you've done your research on it to find out whether or not it should be pinched, just know that you are delaying flowering by about 2 weeks. And also, if you're planning to take cuttings from what you've pinched back, that gives you opportunity right there. So that's why I'm starting some plants earlier than normal. I'm planning to not only pinch them back, I might want to take cuttings. Also, for all the seeds we're going to be sowing today, I have more comprehensive videos that go really into detail with those particular seeds and how the plants look in my landscape. So if you want to look at those older videos where I really have a lot more information on what I'm doing with sowing the seeds, just do a search on my channel. There's a little magnifying glass on my channel page. If you click on that and then you do a search on Impatiens or do a search on Coleus, it will show you all the videos I've ever made having to do with that flower. So I highly encourage you to do that because there definitely will be times when I don't remake or redo a video that I feel it's sufficient enough and it's just out there. So definitely go back on my channel and look up whatever it is that you're looking for. And the reason I say that is the other day someone asked me, Vita, do you have any videos on onions? I don't see you starting them. I do. I have older videos on onions. So I have older videos on lots of different plants, on peppers, on tomatoes. So be sure to do a search on my channel if you're looking for a specific plant, be it a vegetable, some sort of herb, or even a flower. So we'll mix it up today. Let's start with sowing some seeds, and after that, we'll be potting up plants and doing a little bit of chit-chat. Coleus seeds should be started 8 to 12 weeks before your average last frost date. My average last frost date is 15 weeks from now. Again, I know I'm starting these a little bit earlier, but we already talked about why I'm doing that. So now let's go ahead, make up some seed starting mix, and then fill up a container for sowing our seeds in. For my seed starting mix, I like to use 2 parts of peat moss, but you can use cocoa coir if you like. And then I like to add 1 part of vermiculite. I have coarse vermiculite. You can use fine if you want. And then I sprinkle the top with pulverized dolomitic lime. And I use that with peat moss. You don't need to use it with cocoa coir. And the purpose of it is to reduce the acidity that you have in peat moss. When I talk about parts, it's basically whatever you're using for scooping. So in this case, I'm using a bowl. Parts are just ratios. So I could also do, for example, 4 parts or 4 bowls of my peat moss. And to that, I would add 2 parts of my vermiculite or 2 bowls of my vermiculite. And then I would sprinkle the top with my pulverized dolomitic limestone. After I've added all my ingredients, the next thing I like to do is add boiling water from a tea kettle and pour it over my seed starting mix. One reason for adding the water is simply to pre-moisten the mix. But a main reason for adding boiling water is to kill off the possibility of any fungus gnat eggs that might be found inside of the peat moss. I continue adding the boiling water. I want to make sure that the boiling water reaches all parts of the mix. And as I add the water, I just continue to mix the ingredients around. When I'm all done, I want to go ahead and tamp down the mix, and I'm using a spoon because I don't want to touch the mix with my hands. After that, I can put the cover on and let everything cool down before using the mix. When it comes to seed starting, I prefer to multi-sow my seeds, which means I like to sow a whole bunch of seeds in a small restaurant takeout container. And I do that for a number of reasons. One reason is it initially saves space under my grow lights. Another reason is only the seeds that are viable are going to germinate. In other words, if I sow a whole bunch of seeds in here and only some of them are viable, only those ones will germinate. Then what I can do is prick out the seeds that have germinated and pot them up. You don't have to multi-sow your seeds. If you prefer to sow them directly into 6 cell packs or into pots or containers, you can do that as well. But just know that that will take up more room under your grow lights, and also some of the seeds may not germinate, so you may have empty cells. But no matter what pot or container you use, you want to make sure that there are drainage holes in the bottom. I'll be sowing my seeds in a DIY seed starting mix. If you want, you can use any potting mix that you have handy. I like to start my seeds in seed starting mix, and then eventually when I pot up my seedlings, they move into a potting mix. For my seed starting mix, I like to use 2 parts of peat moss, but you can use cocoa coir if you like. And then I like to add 1 part of vermiculite. I have coarse vermiculite. You can use fine if you want. And then I sprinkle the top with pulverized dolomitic lime. And I use that with peat moss. You don't need to use it with cocoa coir. And the purpose of it is to reduce the acidity that you have in peat moss. When I talk about parts, it's basically whatever you're using for scooping. So in this case, I'm using a bowl. Parts are just ratios. So I could also do, for example, 4 parts or 4 bowls of my peat moss. And to that, I would add 2 parts of my vermiculite or 2 bowls of my vermiculite. And then I would sprinkle the top with my pulverized dolomitic limestone. After I've added all my ingredients, the next thing I like to do is add boiling water from a tea kettle and pour it over my seed starting mix. One reason for adding the water is simply to pre-moisten the mix. But a main reason for adding boiling water is to kill off the possibility of any fungus gnat eggs that might be found inside of the peat moss. I continue adding the boiling water. I want to make sure that the boiling water reaches all parts of the mix. And as I add the water, I just continue to mix the ingredients around. When I'm all done, I want to go ahead and tamp down the mix, and I'm using a spoon because I don't want to touch the mix with my hands. After that, I can put the cover on and let everything cool down before using the mix. When I squeeze the mix, I want to make sure that water is not dripping, because if it is, that means the mix is too wet. When I let go, the mix should hold its form. That's the perfect consistency for my seed starting mix to be added to my container pots. Next, let's go ahead and add the seed starting mix to our container. And then I want to press down lightly. And the reason we're doing that is so that we're eliminating any air pockets that might be in here. I have dividers here because I'm going to be sowing a bunch of different Coleus seeds in one restaurant takeout container. I feel comfortable doing that because all the seedlings should germinate around the same time. I normally would not want to sow, let's say, Coleus seeds along with something like tomato seeds because the tomato plants would germinate a lot faster than the Coleus seeds. Also, it could be that certain seeds need a seedling heat mat and other seeds don't need a seedling heat mat. So I try to put the same kind of seeds in one container when possible. And these dividers are just plastic knives that I've cut to size so they fit inside of the container. I created little labels to go with each of the seeds we're going to sow. So the first one is a Coleus mix. I did put down the date that I collected the seeds on all of my tags because some of the seeds are older. And that way, if I have poor germination, I'll know why that is because the seeds are a number of years old. And then I'm also putting down the date that I'm sowing the seeds. Since these seeds are pretty old, I'm actually going to go ahead and sow all of the seeds. Worst case, we have a lot of seedlings we need to prick out. It gets to a point where I don't want to save these seeds anymore. These seeds don't need to be carried over for another year. I would rather start collecting some new seeds later this season and saving those. So let's go ahead and let's sow all of these seeds. And I know that's a lot of seeds there, but not every single seed will germinate. Each year that goes by, seeds lose their germination rate. It's going to vary from seed to seed. I don't know how long the average shelf life is for Coleus seeds, but it doesn't matter. We're going to go ahead and sow them all over here. Yep, that's a lot of seeds. That's a close-up of what Coleus seeds look like. Coleus seeds need light to germinate. So what you want to do is after you sow Coleus seeds, you just want to press them into your potting mix or your seed starting mix. If you are going to cover them, you just barely want to cover them. And this year I will be covering them with vermiculite. In past years, I did not cover any of my seeds with vermiculite, but it is a good practice to do, especially if you're not going to be checking on your seeds that often. They can dry out. And if surface sown seeds, not just Coleus, but any surface sown seed dries out, that's not good. They're not going to germinate or you're going to have very poor germination. If you are very good about checking on your surface sown seeds daily and spritzing them with water every 1 to 2 days, then you can omit the fine vermiculite. It's not necessary. I don't normally sow this many seeds in one little section like this. But like I said, I really am trying to get rid of some of my older seeds, and I have a lot of different types of Coleus seeds I'm trying to sow. So that's why I'm sowing them this heavily. If you wanted to sow them in a 6L pack and sow 2 or 3 seeds, you could definitely do that. And then you could thin them out by either pricking out the extras or just cutting the weakest seedling and keeping the strongest seedling. We now have a light green colored Coleus, and these seeds are a little bit fresher. And there's the date we're sowing them again. I never liked the idea of throwing away plants, but when you collect your own seeds, like how I did here, don't feel guilty if you can't save every single seedling. It took me years to feel that way, but I do collect all my seeds, almost all my seeds. I think many of you know that if you've been watching my videos. So when I collect a lot of seeds, each year that goes by, those seeds are just losing their freshness. So I either need to start all the seeds or I just need to collect less seeds. So I do my best to just collect what I can use. And if I collect too many, that's fine. I do trade them with friends that are local to me, that are in my garden club and things like that, family members. So it's not like they go to full waste. But sometimes you just need to clean up your seed inventory. That's very important, to purge your seeds. And one way that I like to purge my seeds is like what we just did here. Just sow them all and let's see what happens, right? And whichever seeds are going to germinate will germinate. Even though these seeds were fresher, I'm still at a point where I am trying to clean up my seeds as best as I can. And when it comes to this light green colored Coleus, I'd like to add a lot of it to my yard. One of my goals for this year is to really up my game with annuals, not only in container pots, because I do a lot of container gardening, but also to up my game when it comes to having them out in my landscape. I do have a lot of perennials in the landscape, but I want to add more annuals. And it's just too expensive to go out and buy annuals to put out in the landscape. I have fond memories of my mother-in-law. She used to start a lot of petunias, pink-colored petunias. They look like the bubblegum petunias, as well as marigolds from seed. And she would just do a whole entire section of them in her vegetable garden, like a whole row of them. And then she would eventually move them out once they were 1 or 2 inches tall. And they were just so pretty out in her landscape, especially in the fall time with all those marigolds. That's a goal of mine. I'd love to do what she used to do. Put a whole bunch of marigolds towards the front of my flower beds for that nice late summer fall interest. It's been a goal of mine for a number of years, but I really want to try to do that this year. When it comes to these Coleus, I'm doing the best I can to sprinkle them in their little barriers here. But if one seed jumps the wall, again, it's not the end of the world. A question that I got asked recently was, if you have a whole tray of leggy seedlings, what do? Do you trash them? I would not. Personally, I would not trash a whole tray of leggy seedlings. I would rather prick them out and then just bury them deeper, be it within their cells or prick them out of a restaurant takeout container, if that's where they're leggy, and pot them up deeper. But that's just me. Ultimately, you have to decide what works best for you. Maybe it's easier to trash them and re-sow the seeds. Leggy seedlings is not the end of the world. Just, it's better to try to figure out why did the seedlings get leggy and see if you can fix it. When I sow seeds in restaurant takeout containers like this, it's a given that they will be leggy when they first come up because my lights are not like way down on top of them. They might be a little bit higher. I'm not too worried about that because I know I'm going to be pricking them out anyway and potting them up. These ones here are a green center with a red trim. Again, the seeds are older. Check your library because a lot of times libraries have an area where you can drop off seeds or pick up seeds. And it's on my list of things to do, but I do want to drop off seeds at the library because I know that there are a lot of people in the area that could use those seeds. I would much rather do that than ship them out or send them out because honestly, it's just easier for me. And I know that someone in the local area can use them. So I recommend you do the same thing if you have extra seeds or you're looking for seeds. Seeds are very expensive actually to buy. I do like to buy seeds, but you can easily spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So that's why I prefer to just collect my own seeds. And I know that these plants might not look 100% exact like the parent plant, but I don't know. My experience has been they look pretty gosh darn good, even when you collect your own seeds. You're not going to get some totally random weirdo looking plant. You're going to get a plant that looks still very attractive in the garden. At least that's how I feel. And doing this, getting rid of seed packets, for me is very liberating. It makes me feel really good because I don't want to hold on to some of these older seeds anymore. I feel guilty buying seeds when I have so many seeds. I'd rather see what happens. Maybe only a few will germinate. Maybe a ton will germinate. You're going to have to just wait and see. But I feel good that we just did that. Now I'm going to add some fine vermiculite. Vermiculite allows light to come in, and that's important because these seeds need light to germinate. But also vermiculite helps retain moisture. I mentioned it earlier, when you have seeds that you are surface sowing, that's important that they still retain moisture because they might not germinate for 7, 14, 21 days, depending on the seed that you've surface sown. So this will help retain the moisture. I didn't buy a bag of fine vermiculite. I know that it's preferred that you use fine vermiculite. I actually took the vermiculite that I have, which I've been using for my seed starting and my potting mix, and it's a coarse vermiculite, which means it's not fine. And I just take a bowl and I take a strainer and I put the coarse vermiculite in there and I shake it around, and eventually the fine vermiculite comes through. So if you're in the same boat as me and you got stuck with or you ended up with coarse vermiculite, you can do that. You can just take it and put it through a strainer and you'll end up with some nice fine vermiculite. And trust me, it takes a lot of that coarse vermiculite to get the tiniest amount, but You don't really need a lot when you're sprinkling it on top. And like I said, this is optional. You don't have to do this. This is a great option if you're new to seed starting. This is a great option if you know yourself and you're not going to be diligent about spritzing or watering the top of these seeds as you wait for them to germinate. The big thing is you don't want those seeds to dry out. I do check on them every day, and I spritz them with water, I would say every other day. And now I am going to go in and just press these down. I want to make sure that the seeds make good contact with the seed starting mix. I could have done this before I put the vermiculite on. I could do it now that the vermiculite is on there. I just want to get off any possible little seeds that might be on my finger. But again, I'm not too worried because if one seed jumps over to the other side, it's not the end of the world. Eventually, the Coleus will germinate and you will see what the leaves look like. I mentioned earlier I start a lot of plants from seed for my garden. I do have a lot of space that I need to fill or I want to fill in my garden. But then I also sell plants for my plant nursery, like I mentioned earlier. And then the third thing that I do is I adopted a spot. It's about 30 minutes from my house. And it's a beautiful little area. I call it the circle because it's in the shape of a nice big circle. It's in a roundabout. I also like to add flowers there. And this year, I would especially like to add a number of annuals that I started from seed. It has a lot of perennials that were divisions from my yard, and it has perennials that were donated from people in the community. But then I would also like to add more annuals. I have this little hand pump water sprayer thing. I'm going to add water to the top. Even though the seed starting mix is pre-moistened, it's still a good practice to add additional water just to help settle things in. And I'm doing it on a very, very gentle spritz here because I don't want the seeds to go flying everywhere or the vermiculite to go flying everywhere. When you handle vermiculite, you want to be careful. You don't want to be inhaling it. And the same is true if you're handling something like peat moss, because a lot of this can be kind of dusty. Now I'm going to add our clear humidity dome. It's clear, it allows light to come in, which is important for these seeds. It also is a humidity dome, so it keeps it nice and humid inside of here, which is a perfect environment for these seeds to want to germinate in. Coleus seeds will germinate at a soil temperature between 70 and 75 degrees. I'm going to be placing this on a seedling heat mat. That's optional. If your grow space is somewhere in that range, then you don't need to use a seedling heat mat. This is going to get placed under grow lights, and the grow lights are on a timer. They come on at 5 a.m., they go off at 9 p.m. They're on at 16 hours a day. I plan to check on these daily, and I will be spritzing them with water about every 2 days or so. As soon as I see about 50% to 75% germination, at that point, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to remove the humidity dome. If I leave the humidity dome on while germination is really happening in there, that's actually not good for the seedlings, and it can cause fungal issues like damping off. When I also have very good germination, this is going to get removed off of the seedling heat mat. If I leave it on there too long, it's going to cause my seedlings to become very leggy. And once the humidity dome is removed, and once the tray is removed off of the seedling heat mat, the tray itself will still get placed under my grow lights 16 hours a day. I'm going to do one more tray of Coleus, but I'm going to do this off camera. But be on the lookout when I do my weekly seedling tours. I'll show you what kind of germination we get, even for these guys. So this one here is called Pineapple Surprise. I got these seeds from my friend Christine D. from New York. Christine, thank you for sending out these seeds. I'm super excited to try them. The next set of seeds I'll be sowing off camera. These are Coleus Colocha Rose. I bought these seeds a number of years ago from Baker Creek. It is a super pretty Coleus. So I will be sowing a number of those seeds. And then the final set of seeds I'm going to sow, these are a larger type of Coleus. It has a green edge with a dark red center. And when it comes to everything I do here, it will be the same process just like I showed you. The only difference will be I'm not planning to sow all of these seeds. Because this is the only packet of seeds I have and they're newer, I don't want to just use them all up. So I'll probably only sow, I'm guessing, 25% of these seeds. And the same will be true for my Colocha Rose. I love this one, and just in case, you never know, maybe I have an issue when I sow my seeds and something goes wrong, I'll at least have backup seeds. And that's always a good thing to keep in mind. Don't put all your eggs in one basket if you don't have to, because you might have to restart some seeds. And for these guys over here, I have 2 packets of seed. I'll probably just use up 1 whole packet of seeds. Now I really need to get some seedlings potted up. These are Vinca or Madagascar periwinkle. They are super pretty. They're not like the typical Vinca that you would find sprawling as a ground cover. They are an annual, at least where I live, although in warmer climates they are a perennial, and they come in a lot of different colors. Usually every morning when I wake up and I have my cup of coffee, I have my laptop here and I like to watch other YouTube channels and their videos. It's a great time for me to come in and just start potting up seedlings. It's going to get very busy from now on with potting up seedlings. So I figured we could do some of it together today while I chat with you about things that are on my mind. And I loved having these type of chats with you because it's a nice way for me to feel like I'm not alone. I'm sitting with a garden friend and I'm doing work while we chat. Although it's not one-sided because I'm chatting with you, but I know you're watching it. And I love when you comment because then I know you're watching my videos and you have something to say or something to add. And we can have that conversation or that dialogue, which I really do enjoy. I've been thinking about my garden a lot lately and changes that I want to make to it, plants that I want to divide and move around. And there's a plant that I don't want to say it's controversial, but it's definitely a plant that I've noticed during the last, I would say last few years, where people are removing it from their garden. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it. The plant is the daylily. It seems like there's a love-hate relationship with that particular plant. And I see a number of people on the internet that are removing it from their garden. And it got me thinking about that should I do the same thing? Should I follow suit? Because I guess it's an ugly plant. It's a plant that you see in front of a lot of stores or in the parking lot. And maybe I need to remove it as well. And I started thinking more about it, about why is there, at least what I feel, why is there so much hate towards that plant? And I get it that on one hand, after one day of blooms, the plant basically doesn't have much more going on. So each flower, it's called a daylily, each flower lasts one day and then it's done. And also there's the whole thing about the leaves, that eventually the leaves are kind of ugly to look at, unsightly. So I get it from that perspective, like, is it worth having in our gardens? So when it comes to my own garden, I have a lot of space that I need to fill. And daylilies were kind of a no-brainer for me. I got a whole bunch of them from my mother-in-law's. And then one year, or actually a couple of years, my sister-in-law had a number of Stella d'Oro daylilies that she just needed removed. And I happily took them to fill up spaces and gaps in my yard. And I look at daylilies kind of like rabbits. They propagate or multiply very quickly. And that's not a bad thing if you bought a brand new house and you need space to fill and there's someone else that's looking to divide their daylilies. It's a great way to get free plants and to fill up your space. And then there are a lot of daylilies out there that come in different colors and they bloom at different times of the year. So even if you have daylilies that basically put on a great show, like the Stella d'Oro daylilies, and then they're done, it is maintenance to come in and deadhead them. And even after you deadhead them really well, it's not like they're going to put on another great flush of colors. They'll just sporadically put out colors, even the reblooming ones. That's the way they work. So I wanted to talk about it because I basically want to tell you it's your garden and you do what you feel is right. If you have very small space and you just hate daylilies, then you shouldn't feel bad or guilty about pulling them out. Your garden should be filled with whatever you enjoy. But if you love it, but you're seeing a lot of people that hate it, it doesn't matter. It's at the end of the day, it's your garden and you should grow what you really enjoy in your space. And when it does come to daylilies, it is maintenance to deadhead them for sure so that they look still pretty in your garden. And you do have the option of cutting back the leaves. I made a video, I think it was last year, that showed my process for basically cutting my daylilies right down to the ground. And that gets rid of the ugliness for a while. And then they slowly start to push out new leaves and they look fresh again later in the season. So you do have that option when it comes to daylilies. They will never bloom the same way they did the first time around, but that's okay. So if you do have a color that you really like, or maybe you're like me and you have something sentimental in terms of daylilies in your garden, don't feel like you have to get rid of it just because you see a lot of other people doing it. Because, another thing that I notice, and I'll get off the topic of daylilies and I'll talk about some other plants. Another plant that also has unsightly leaves, from what I've seen, are the spring blooming alliums. They're very, very pretty. You see a lot of people on the internet that are planting them. But then they too can have ugly leaves. And so then the question is, are you going to pull all those out? Are you going to keep them? Again, you got to do what's right for you in your garden. I like them, and I'm still kind of on the fence whether or not I want them in my yard because of the leaves. I have a few, and if I am going to have them in my yard, just like the daylilies, maybe the solution is to hide the leaves so that you're not looking at those ugly leaves. I know a lot of people do that with the alliums, but that is an option with the daylilies as well. And yes, if you can't tell, I am team daylilies. I don't think they should be removed unless you absolutely hate them or you don't have the room. It's really, again, it's up to you. But in my yard, I'm definitely going to keep them because I do like them. I don't necessarily need them everywhere. When I got those daylilies, the Stelladoros from my sister-in-law's, I filled up a lot of areas in my yard with Stelladoro, and they looked so pretty when they were all blooming. But then as soon as they were done blooming, there were gaps in spaces where nothing else was blooming. And that's my reasoning for trying to thin out some of the Stelladoros in my yard, because I need a succession of blooms, not just Stelladoros, but other things blooming as well. And as gardeners, we learn that over time. So that got me thinking. Let's say you have a whole bunch of daylilies and you're like, yep, they're ugly. I want to get rid of all of them. And so you get rid of them in your garden, and now you need to fill them with something else. It could be something you started from seed. But I started thinking more about some of the plants that, again, I see on the internet that are bred to really be beautiful. So let's take coneflower, for example. We have the native coneflowers. We have coneflowers that have been around a long time. And there are basically certain perennials that will last a long time in our garden, right? And I'm pretty sure purple coneflower is one of them. If you actually Google or look up how long does a purple coneflower plant live, it can live a long time. But then there are a lot of new plants that are being introduced that are hybrids. And by the way, I'm just speaking not necessarily from experience or knowledge. I'm just speaking from anything I've researched, and I'm trying to educate myself better. And I would love your opinion on this. So if I was to replace all the daylilies in my yard with, let's say, some of the really fancier, beautiful coneflowers that have been bred out there, some of the more compact ones, the ones that have the double blooms on them, and they're all the different vibrant colors. At least from my research, I found that those tend to be shorter living. They're short-lived perennials that maybe only live 3 years, maximum 5 years. And so if we're going to get rid of certain plants, let's even say purple coneflower, because you see them everywhere, and you get rid of your purple coneflowers, a majority of them, and you replace them with these hybridized coneflowers. I kind of feel like, okay, so I'm getting rid of the long-living perennials and I'm replacing them with these short-living perennials. And as a budget gardener, that doesn't really make sense to me. So I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about that, about what I want to do in my own space, and I want to do it in a way that I have plants blooming at all different times of the season, which for me is generally 3 seasons: spring, summer, and fall, because winter months is all snow. And so I definitely want color for 3 seasons, but I also don't want to be replacing plants that are short-lived. That doesn't make a lot of sense, at least for my budget. And perhaps with those short-lived perennials, if you are very, very good about dividing them often, and I'm not sure about when you collect the seeds from those hybrids, I'm pretty sure a lot of those hybrids don't come true to the parent plant. So the only way to propagate it is through division. But there, maybe I tend to be a more laid-back gardener, and I don't want to deal with having to divide these short-lived perennials just to keep them going in my yard. Again, these are just things that I think about for my own space, and I wonder if anyone else is thinking that way. And again, this is not a topic necessarily about native. We should all be moving towards native only because they're long-living plants versus, non-native plants. I'm not sure about all of that, but it's more the topic of gardening on a budget and pulling out plants because we don't like them, or pulling out plants because we see other people doing it on the internet, so we should do it. It just got me thinking. But then, then it got me thinking about another topic, which is ground covers. Since I have a plant nursery, I hear a lot of people that say they want ground covers because they need to fill up an area, let's say under a tree. And then other people will say to me, oh no, I definitely don't want that ground cover because it's taken over a whole area in my yard and I don't want it. So, thanks to the internet and Instagram and YouTube, we see a lot, right? And so we see some people that are going all in on ground covers in their garden. And it might make sense in their garden because maybe they have a very large space, right? A very big, very deep garden bed. And they want to fill some of that area towards the front of the garden bed. In that situation, it makes sense. In fact, a lot of spaces in my yard, I have areas like that I do want to put ground cover because I want to cover the ground in these big flower beds that I have. But then it's important to also to look at your space or your garden bed. And if it's a smaller space, then a ground cover might not make sense because it will cover the ground. It will take over. So you need to think about that, right? I definitely have garden spaces in my yard that are more confined, that are smaller. And if I was to put a juga, let's say, which I love, in a smaller space, it would take over. And now I don't have space to put some of the more beautiful flowers that I want in that area. So these are all things that I know that many of you are already thinking about, but especially if you're new to gardening, it's important to, really do your research before you pull out plants or before you put in plants based on what you're seeing on the internet, because it's easy to, I think, just follow along with the crowd and do what other people are doing. But remember, their climate might be different than your climate. Their space, their flower bed might be different than your flower bed. Their budget might be different than your budget. Lots of things to think about. When it comes to pricking out these seedlings that I'm doing like right now, something that I'm trying to be better about is basically just getting a whole tray of cell packs filled up. And it might be the night before that I get them filled up. So in the morning when I come down and I'm groggy, I'm tired, I'm having my coffee, and I know I need to get some seedlings potted up, at least the hard work is done, or I'd say it's 50% done, filling up these trays. And I do like to make my own seed starting or potting mix. So in this case with the potting mix, I can basically empty out my whole container that's full of my potting mix, and I can fill all these cell packs, and that can be the night before a job. And then the next morning, my job could be to fill up these trays with seedlings that I'm potting up, and then to make up a new batch of potting mix. I'm trying to be a little bit more, I don't want to say efficient, but I want to motivate myself better so that it's not so overwhelming. And I like making videos frequently when it comes to seed starting and just sharing what's going on in my head and why am I doing what I'm doing, because maybe it might give you inspiration or an idea of things you can do. And the reason I'm not bringing you in closer to show you my process for pricking out these seedlings is I've already made videos on how to prick out vinca seedlings. So if you want to see the process, you can definitely look at some of my older videos. Today's video is mostly just to start some of the seeds that I wanted to start, and then also just to chat about some of the things that have been on my mind. Another thing to keep in mind as you watch my video or anyone else's is when we are starting our seeds. And I know I talked about it earlier, but you might see a video out there that says 15 seeds to start now. That is true for where that person lives. So, keep that in mind, that it might be a video that's very popular because it says 10 seeds to start in February. That's based on where that person lives. So it's important for you to look at that and then adjust it based on your needs. And again, if you've been sowing seeds for a long time, you're probably like, yeah, Vita, I already know that. But I'm mostly trying to talk about this to someone that is new to seed starting, that just it's always so good to just do your own research. And even if you're following along with me and your average last frost date is the same as mine, I still might be starting my seeds a little bit earlier than I should be. And I mentioned that earlier on why I'm doing that. So you want to be starting your seeds based on not only where you live, but also based on your time and what your end goal is. Starting seeds earlier doesn't always mean you're going to have a bigger, healthier plant. Sometimes you might actually end up with a more stressed plant. A good example would be tomatoes. You know, sometimes you go to the stores and you see those big, huge tomato plants, and you think, I'm going to get my tomatoes earlier because I'm going to start off with a bigger plant. That's not always the case. Sometimes those plants are stressed out. And I mean, I think probably many of us have done it ourselves where we've bought a big plant like that from a big box store. And then we had a small little seedling, and then the little seedling catches up. So basically, starting plants earlier than what is suggested is not always good for the seedling or for you. And there's a reason why packets will say when to start the seeds. But with that said, sometimes the packets are wrong too. That's what I've learned. And that's why with pretty much any plant that I start the seeds of, I not only look at what it says in the packet, I actually go on the internet and I do a search on what I can find for information as well. I try to gather as much information as I can before I actually sow some seeds. And one thing that I like to look at, and I learned this from looking at, I don't remember whose channel it was, but someone else mentioned this on their channel. It's called culture sheets. And culture sheets are given by companies that want you to grow on plugs for, like, let's say your business. Maybe you have a cut flower business or something like that. I don't have a cut flower business, and I'm definitely not buying in plugs because that just costs too much money that I can't spend. But when it comes to those culture sheets, it's great information and it's free and it's out there. I like to look at it because it will have information on basically whether or not the seeds need light or darkness to germinate, whether or not they need, what kind of soil temperature they need. So based on the soil temperature, that gives me an idea of whether or not I should use a seedling heat mat. So if you are looking for, I would call it more reputable information, those culture sheets are usually very good information. I mentioned earlier about heat mats. I do have a video that talks about heat mats, but the one thing I want to say is you will see me using heat mats. And heat mats are good, but they're not always the answer. There are definitely seeds that will not germinate, or you'll have very poor germination if you put them on a heat mat. So when I first got my heat mat, I just assumed pretty much everything needs bottom heat, not only to germinate, but to germinate fast. And be careful with if you have a heat mat because you might end up actually having poor germination. So I do like to use heat mats, but with caution. I like to use them very carefully. Sometimes, in fact, they can dry things out very quickly. And I've learned the hard way when it comes to like taking cuttings of plants that I'm in a rush and I want to get my cuttings. I want my plants to root really, really fast. And then nothing happens. And then the soil's drying out. So sometimes, and I used to say this to my kids, and I used to say it when I was a robotics coach, haste makes waste. So don't be in such a rush and be putting everything on your heat mats if you have a heat mat, because haste makes waste. Quick update, even though I just did a seedling tour recently and I was showing you my begonia seedlings, this morning I did go ahead and I removed them off of the seedling heat mats. I don't think that it's benefiting them to be on there anymore. The only ones that I'm keeping on there are my tuberous begonia seedlings because I still feel that I have more seeds that might germinate. But all of my wax begonias at this point are no longer on the seedling heat mat. I've also removed the humidity dome off of there. So at this point, things are going to dry out super fast. And that means I need to be bottom watering pretty much every time I feel the tray and it feels light. If you're also growing along with me and you're growing some tuberous or wax begonias, just make sure that you don't let things dry out, because if you have them like I do in a restaurant takeout container, they're going to dry out pretty quickly. If you want to, you can probably still leave your humidity dome back on there if it makes you feel more comfortable. I don't usually recommend it for other plants, but when it comes to the begonias, because they're so tiny, if you feel more comfortable, you can leave the humidity dome still on there. Just take it off of the seedling heat map if you have very good germination. And someone asked me recently, if their seedlings are still very, very tiny, do they have to prick them out and pot them up? You don't have to. You definitely don't have to. But if you are bottom watering them, which I am doing now at this point, I am giving them a half a strength of fertilizer. I did it this morning. Just make sure that you're still giving them water, that you're still even fertilizing them if they have their true leaves on them. But you can leave your humidity dome on there if you want to. I was getting a little bit worried. I didn't want basically the seedlings to get too much heat at this point. Some of the leaves were looking a little bit reddish pink color, so I just wanted to get them off of the bottom heat. I have a lot of seeds that I have collected myself, not just annuals, but perennials. When it comes to the annual seeds, I am planning to do a big purge of seeds this year. A few years ago, I did that with my perennial seeds. I winter sowed a whole ton of them. A lot of them were older seeds, just because I wanted to feel liberated and I wanted to feel like I could start over again and not feel guilty if I was buying more seeds or even collecting more seeds, because I had so many old seeds sitting around. So this is my year of purging my annual seeds. And one way of purging them, like I showed you earlier, is just by sowing a ton of them. I can do the best I can with potting up, and if it becomes overwhelming, they are seeds generally that I collected myself, so I'm not going to feel too bad if I can't do anything with them. But I need to be at a point for myself where I'm letting go of those seeds and just planting them and letting whatever happens, happens. If I end up with too many, then that's fine too. I don't need to keep them all in terms of the seedlings that germinate. But I don't want to hold on to old seeds anymore. And I do want to buy some seeds or collect some seeds from new plants, but I also want to just get rid of the old ones. And I'm mentioning that just in case you see me starting a lot of seeds this year. I usually start a lot of seeds anyway, but this year I'll be starting more than I normally do because I'm trying to clean up house and basically do a purge of my seeds. And not only that, I do want to have some different plants in my yard. In the last few years, I got to a point where I start my begonias, I start my impatiens, I start certain plants, but then I stop because all my shelves get full, my time is limited, and then I don't end up sowing those seeds that you normally would sow 8 weeks before your average last frost date, 6 weeks before your average last frost date. I would just end up not doing it. So I have a lot of those older seeds from that period of time when you're supposed to start those seeds, those ones that are 8 weeks and less. So this is a year that I'm just going to start a whole bunch of stuff, scatter them in a tray, and whatever happens, happens. I also want to do a little more research this year on which plants can actually get planted out before my average last frost date. That is, even though I've been gardening for, I don't even know how long, it might be 30, 35 years, I'm still always learning. I think we always are as gardeners, no matter how long we've been gardening, and which makes it such a great hobby, I feel. So I'm not great about knowing all the plants that I can plant out 8 weeks before my average last frost date, 6 weeks before my average last frost date. There's like a whole list of them out there. And so I don't have that list. I don't have it generated, but I want to start working on a list and figuring that out. I'm going to use Google AI to help me, but then I'm going to do more homework and I'm going to research it, because you can't just do that. Sometimes that information is wrong. And I'm going to try to compile a list together of which plants can I put out when, because normally I just wait until my average last frost date to put a lot of my plants out, when in fact some of those plants could have gone out a month before. And I know some of those plants include like Dusty Miller or Sweet Alyssum. Some of the obvious ones are like pansies, violas, lettuce, But I want to do better this year. I want to really know which ones can go out when, like snapdragons. I usually wait until after my average last frost date to put out snapdragons. This year I want to get those out earlier. Same with sweet peas. So I'm still learning, and that's okay. I'm definitely going to do better this year with getting those out. And that's a good thing, actually. The plants will be happier. I'll be happier because I get them out of my grow lights, or I get them out of my garage and into the ground. So it's a win-win for the plants and I both. The other thing that I will be doing more of this year, starting now, are videos like this, where it's basically more of a vlog rather than just, an educational, this is how you do this process. Because these seeds that we're sowing today are all seeds that I've already made videos on. And rather than make the same video every year, I'd rather just do a vlog where we're doing a bunch of things together. And if you want more detailed information, you can always do a search on my channel specifically on that plant, because some of the seeds that we're sowing today, I really do show like how does the plant look in my garden when it first is blooming, and then later in the season, how does it look when it's really filled in. Like I know I did that with the Coleus. I show you how does it look in my garden in different areas of my garden. So it's nice to sometimes see that rather than just here are the seeds and this is how we sow it. But then there is also the reality of I just need to get sowing. I need to sow these seeds, and that's what we're going to do. We're just going to sow the seeds together. And I would rather do it with you rather than just do it on the side and then all of a sudden, oh, look, I have a whole bunch of plants that I sowed the seeds of. And I know that some of you enjoy following along with me. So this is a great way for me to also have you follow along. It's just by doing more of a garden vlog, and we're sowing a bunch of things together. And not only that, we're potting up seedlings too. Someone asked me recently about the overwintering plants and that they're following along with me, and when will I be making a video on that. I usually make that kind of video once a month. So I've been doing it pretty much the middle of every month. There'll be a few more weeks. But definitely keep checking on your overwintering plants. You don't want to forget about them. It's so easy to forget about them. You don't want to give them too much water, but give them enough water. And also, I know that a lot of you will have your average last frost date happen well before mine. So as that average last frost date starts to approach, you'll want to be hardening off those plants slowly. Give them at least, I would say, 7 days to harden off. And if you're not sure how to harden off a plant, you can always look it up on the internet, but you want to do it slowly because those plants have been in a protected environment and you don't want to just bring them out into the elements that quickly. And if you were overwintering, let's say some perennials that you want to get out in the ground, you can definitely do that in the springtime. I know a number of people are overwintering mums for the first time. Same thing, those are good ones to get out right in the springtime because mums take a long time for their roots to establish. I'll be showing videos when I do it, but I realize many of you have average last frost dates well before mine. So feel free to just start doing that slowly as your dates approach. Same thing with any of the corms, tubers, bulbs that you're overwintering. Don't forget to keep checking on those. If they're getting dry, feel free to give them a little spritz of water. If you need to wake them up, you can always do an internet search. Like how many weeks before my average last frost date can I wake up my calla lilies or my canna lilies or my dahlias? You can look that information up. And I do have videos on my channel. You can also do a search where I tell you how many weeks to wake up certain plants. And I wouldn't do an extensive search if you're looking it up on my channel. Just do a search on calla lily or calla lilies and then hit enter, and it'll show you all the videos that have to do with calla lily on my channel. I still have more vinca that I need to pot up, but I need a break from this, which is good because now we need to do more sowing of seeds. So let's do that. I said I wasn't going to sow onion seeds, and here I am sowing them. I just couldn't help it. I never see Walla Walla in the stores, and I actually saw it this year. So I got it. And I did make a label on the date that we're sowing the seeds, and I'm just going to be sowing them again in this type of container. You can sow them in whatever you want. Later on, though, I will be pricking them out and potting them up. I have a video that shows that process. Just do a search on my channel on onion, And it'll show you, I have, I think, 4 videos having to do with caring for your onion seedlings. And just be sure to look that up if you want to know more about it, because not all onions are the same, and you want to make sure you're planting the right type of onion in your area. And I have a video that goes over that. So let's put our tag in, and we're going to be sowing all of the seeds. There are certain seeds, even if you buy them brand new, that have a very short shelf life. Typically pelleted seeds, seeds that have a pellet on them, you want to sow the first year. They might still germinate for you the second year, but they might not. That's what's on the back of the seed packet in case you're interested. And that's the number of seeds that are in there. So if I was to buy pelleted seeds, I would want to just use them up the first year. And the same is true with the onion seeds. I want to use them up the first year because the germination rate will go down next year, and then it'll go down even more the year after. And when it comes to onions, you definitely can sow them pretty heavily because all they're going to be doing is putting their energy into root development. And then on a later date, I will come in here and I will pot them up. And again, if you look on my channel, I do show my process for potting them up. I most likely will not show it this year, but you never know. I also said I most likely will not be growing onions, and here I am growing onions. So I'm just scattering them all on the top here, but onions do need darkness to germinate, so I will be covering them. You want to start your onion seeds about 12 to 15 weeks before your average last frost date, and you want to cover them about a 1/4 inch deep. So we're just barely going to cover them. And then I'm going to press down. I want the seeds to make good contact with my potting mix or my seed starting mix. I'm going to add some of the vermiculite on top. I'm going to spray, just add a little bit more water in here. In order for the seeds to germinate, the soil temperature needs to be somewhere between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a very large range. So you don't need to put it on a seed mat if you don't want to. But if you do have a seedling heat mat, it could hurt, it could help. You really need to just do what's right for you. I am going to put it on a seedling heat mat, but I'm also going to be watching. And if I see the little sprouts of green showing up, I want to remove it. But if you don't think you're going to be as good about checking it every day, I wouldn't use a seedling heat mat if your house or your grow room is warm enough. It's just not worth it. As long as the room is somewhere between 68, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, just no need for a heat mat. But the big thing is make sure you do put it under grow lights, especially as soon as you see the green sprouts showing up, and you want those lights on about 16 hours a day. Expect to see germination in about 1 to 3 weeks. And again, as soon as I start seeing little sprouts, not only does this come off the seedling heat mat, but I'll also be removing the cover. And this will continue to stay under my grow lights. Next, we're going to sow Impatiens, and they are very old, 6 years old. So I will be sowing them pretty heavily. In this packet, there are a bunch of seed and non-seed material all mixed together. I'm going to do the best I can to just try to get the seeds. When you sow a bunch of the non-seed material, which is called the chaff, it can sometimes mold. And that recently happened with some of the snapdragon seeds that I sowed. So I'm going to try my best to just sow as much of just the seeds as I can. And I'm just using a kitchen strainer with a bowl beneath it to get as much of the non-seed material in the top and as much of the seeds in the bottom. I was looking at what it says on here. It says Impatiens mixed, but then it also says other. Well, we'll find out what else comes up with the Impatiens that pop up. That's a lot of seeds. This is the year of starting over, I think, when it comes to my annual seeds, and I'm very excited about that. It'll be interesting to see what pops up and how many seeds germinate here. When it comes to Impatiens, you can buy the seeds pretty cheap from the Dollar Tree. That's what I did last year, just for an experiment, just to see what I thought about their seeds. And I was very pleased. So if you are looking to start Impatiens from seed, usually you can find the seeds at big box stores, but Dollar Tree also has quite a few seeds. And I said I was going to sow all of these seeds, but boy, we just covered this pretty well. So I think I might end up doing another restaurant takeout container, but this is plenty. And I could also wait, right? I could wait 1 or 2 weeks, see what happens, and then sow the rest of these. And I might just end up doing that because we are starting these early enough. You want to sow impatient seeds 10 to 12 weeks before your average last frost date, and the seeds need light to germinate. So you don't want to cover them, and if you are going to cover them, you just barely want to cover them. We are adding a nice layer of vermiculite because that will help retain moisture for these surface sown seeds while still allowing light to come in. I'll also be checking on these every day and spritzing them with water about every other day. They like a soil temperature between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so I will be using a seedling heat mat. Your grow room might run very, very hot, and if it does, you might not need a seedling heat mat. But if your grow room is on the colder side, like very cold, then I would definitely recommend a seedling heat mat for impatiens. Germination can be slow, so expect to see germination in about 7, if not 21 days. It could be sporadic, so be patient. These are going to get placed on a seedling heat mat under my grow lights. And again, just like everything else, once we have very good germination, it'll get removed off the heat mat. The humidity dome will get taken off, but they're still going to get put under lights, which are on 16 hours a day. I have a lot of shade in my yard, which is why I love to grow impatiens, and they're very easy to collect the seeds from. So we also have a mix of different impatiens here, just different colors. I'll be sowing these seeds off camera, but I just wanted to show you. And then I'm really excited about these. I don't have a lot of white impatiens. I had one white impatiens flower in my yard last year, and I collected seeds from it. I want to add more white impatiens. I just think having white flowers in the garden is just so pretty. I'll do the same exact process when it comes to sowing these seeds. The final set of seeds that we're going to sow are trailing lobelia. These seeds are super tiny, so if you are going to sow the seeds of trailing lobelia, don't get discouraged. The seedlings will come up. They'll be very, very small. And if you sow them heavily like I am, you'll see in a few weeks how tiny they are. They take a long time to grow from a seed into a plant. I've done it for a number of years. I do enjoy it, but I just wanted to give that warning in case this is your first time trying it. Don't get discouraged. They will eventually get bigger, I promise. I did buy these seeds last year because I specifically don't have this color here, and that's really pretty. I do have variations of the blue and even white, but I want to definitely get some of this color in my garden, and then I also want to be able to collect the seeds from that color. So these are botanical interest seeds, and what I like about their seeds is there's a lot of information on the front, there's a lot of information on the back, and you can always stop the screen if you want to read any of this information. But then also there's a lot of great information on the inside of the seed packets as well as on their website. And it's funny because I have the seed packet that looks open, but I don't remember sowing these seeds because I don't remember seeing this flower of this color. So anyway, the plan is we're going to sow, I'm pretty sure, all of the seeds that are in here. That's a lot of seeds. If you're going to follow along with me, you don't feel like you need to sow all of those seeds. I just am going to sow them because, again, I want to get that pink color. And if I only do a small amount of seeds, I'm not sure if I'll get that pink color. When it comes to sowing small little seeds like this, I think it would be almost impossible to try to sow them in 6 cell packs. You could do it, but I just don't think it would be that easy. What I'm probably going to do is, as I start seeing germination happening, I'm going to start coming in and start pricking out little seedlings. I'm not going to wait for them to get their first set of true leaves. And I know that I'm not giving these enough space. I really should be probably sowing these seeds just alone in one restaurant takeout container. So if you are going to follow along with me and you want to plant trailing lobelia seeds and you have that many seeds, you want to give enough room, a whole restaurant takeout container. I'm definitely sewing them too tight in here, and I know it. I'd rather tell you what the right thing is to do, but for me, I just am going to sow this many seeds and try to tackle them as they come up. Someone had asked me about trailing lobelia and if it's a good one to put in hanging baskets. Oftentimes you will see, when you go to a garden center, you'll see trailing lobelia in the hanging baskets. But I've done it before where I've bought a hanging basket like years ago, and it had trailing lobelia, and that was the first thing to die in the hanging basket. Trailing lobelia needs a lot of water in order to do well. And if it doesn't get the water, it's just going to crisp up and die. So if you are going to put it in some sort of a container pot, then you want to make sure it's set up on irrigation or that you're watering it frequently, especially during those really hot days. Otherwise, it's going to be the first plant to unfortunately die in a container pot. We now have a light blue color, and these were seeds that I collected myself. I'm not gonna scatter all of them because they're fairly new seeds, and I'm really just aiming on getting a very good germination over here and then some other colors here, which again, I think some of these colors are similar to what we're gonna see there. So let's go ahead and sow those. You usually want to sow trailing lobelia about 8 to 12 weeks before your average last frost date. And like I mentioned earlier, these are all plants that I'm planning to pinch. So I want to make sure that I'm starting them a little bit earlier because I will be pinching them, which will push back their bloom time. I'm bringing you in really close because if you look, you can see the little tiny seeds. I'm going to put an arrow on the screen or a circle so that you can see how tiny they are next to my fingernail. They're really small. And it doesn't appear like I have a ton of seeds here, at least not from what I can see. So because of that, I think I will just sow everything that was in that bag. There's definitely a lot of non-seed material, but I'm not seeing a ton of seeds. So we might as well just get rid of everything that's in that bag. For all the seeds that I'm sowing today, you'll have to let me know if you've ever sown the same seeds yourself. And how have you done with it? Have you had success or not? In the past, when it comes to some of my older videos and comments I've gotten, I've definitely had a lot of people say that they've struggled to grow impatiens from seed. And if you have shade in your area where you live, in somewhere in your yard, you should definitely try to grow impatiens from seed. I think it's a plant that is fun to grow, but again, because it takes a while for those seeds to germinate and because the seeds need light to germinate, and because seeds like it a little bit warmer, there's a lot of factors there that you need to consider. But it's definitely doable. All right, we're going to go all in. I know that I see little tiny seeds in there, but I can't tell how many, so I'd rather just go ahead and get them sprinkled. One thing I've learned about trailing lobelia is during the season, it starts to fizzle out a little bit as soon as it gets really hot out. And not only that, it appreciates a haircut. It's kind of like sweet alyssum. Sweet alyssum starts to look kind of leggy. There are just certain annuals that appreciate a cutback, and trailing lobelia is definitely one of them. Just to keep it in check so it doesn't, what happens is it starts to go by, the spent flowers start to go to seed, and it just looks kind of scraggly. We're cleaning up house. We're just going to get rid of all of these. These seeds need a soil temperature between 70 and 75 degrees. So again, a seedling heat mat is recommended if you have one. Just bringing you in closer so you can see, again, it's hard to see the seeds because we do have a lot of non-seed material. And believe it or not, this even went through a strainer, and that's what came through, was just what's remaining here. If I invested in a nicer strainer that had even more of a finer type of material, perhaps I would have had more luck separating the seed from the non-seed material, but it's all good. At the end of the day, we'll have enough lobelia, right? And these seeds need light to germinate, so we'll just be pressing them into the soil surface and covering them with the vermiculite, which will again help retain the moisture so they don't dry out. Expect to see germination in about 2 to 3 weeks. It's another type of plant that is slow growing, so be patient. Very slow to grow, very slow to germinate, and very slow to grow. And if you're new to seed starting, I would recommend plants that are quicker to grow from seed, something like a marigold or a sunflower, because some of these seeds that are very slow to grow and take a long time to germinate, they can be a little discouraging if you're new to seed starting. But it's still fun to follow along, still fun to learn, and then fun to try when the time, when you're ready for it. With these seeds, I have a lot, and they were just collected last year. So I am definitely not going to be sowing all of them because we don't need that many. And it is good to save some seeds because let's just say something happens in the fall and I just don't get around to collecting any more lobelia seeds for whatever the reason is. At least I have a backup for next year. And remember that, keep that in mind. You want to keep some seeds in reserve as a backup in case you're not able to buy some or you're not able to collect some, or if for whatever reason while you're sowing your seeds, you have very poor germination, something happens, things dry out, then you have a backup supply. But if your seeds are super old, then it's just better, in my opinion, to just sow them all and get rid of them. Let's put our vermiculite on. Oh, I'm kind of scared to see what happens on this side. That will be a fun seedling tour. Bazinga! Now what? I would love to be able to add these into my hanging baskets. I have hanging baskets, quite a few of them in my yard, as well as window boxes. The only way I would ever consider doing that is if I was to set up all my hanging baskets and all my window boxes on drip irrigation. That's the only way I would even consider adding Trillium Lobelia into those. It's just not happy if it gets dry. And just pressing it in so that they all have good contact. And since the seeds are tiny, but at the end of the day, again, like I mentioned earlier, if things move around and you got seeds going everywhere, it really does not matter. I think if I was a grower, I had my own greenhouse, my own business, then it matters. But really, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. They're all going to bloom at some point, and then you'll see their color. And once they're blooming and you see their color, then you can put them wherever you want. Not too worried about it. And when it comes to potting them up and labeling, sometimes I get lazy. I don't even label them anymore with their color because eventually they will bloom. Eventually I will see their color. So why spend the effort with labeling all these different types of tags? Sometimes it's not worth it. I just want some pretty flowers, and they're pretty cheap. We collected our own seeds, and it's really not, we're not out much. There, let's just do that. Give it some water. Humidity dome, and on a seedling heat mat it goes. It feels so good to get all that done. I'm very excited, and I'm going to keep you updated in future videos as soon as seeds start germinating and when it comes time for me to bottom water, for me to fertilize, prick seedlings out, pot them up. Lots of work to be done, but I wouldn't want it any other way. It's a process I really enjoy, and I love bringing you along in case you're growing any of these and you want to learn a little bit more. If you like this kind of video and you want to see more just like this one, please hit the like button, because not only does it help me out, it sends the video out to other people that might be looking for this kind of content. If you have any questions or comments on what you saw in this video or previous videos, feel free to drop it down in the comment section below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.